Hey, altruistic followers and constructive critics, I presume you and your dear Anya are fine and dandy. In 2021, after a dark year 2020, it is social activist come good-hearted preacher Professor S. Suresh back with the sheer ecstasy for my 129th video on unveil of publication on YouTube today, 11th March 2021, Thursday, after a break of a month and a half. The topic for today is review of COVID-19 vaccines and the effectiveness. Okay, a COVID-19 vaccine is a vaccine intended to provide acquired immunity against severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2, the virus causing coronavirus disease 2019 called as COVID-19. Prior to COVID-19 pandemic, there was established body of knowledge about the structure and function of coronaviruses causing diseases like severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, and Middle East respiratory syndrome, MERS, which enabled accelerated development of various vaccine technologies during early 2020. On 10th January 2020, the SARS-CoV-2 genetic sequence data was shared through GISAID, and by 19 March, the global pandemic pharmaceutical industry announced a major commitment to address COVID-19. As of February 2021, 66 vaccine candidates are in clinical research, including 17 in phase 1 trials, 23 in phase 2 trials, 6 in phase 2 trials, and 20 in phase 3 trials. Trials for 4 other candidates are terminated. In phase 3 trials, several COVID-19 vaccines demonstrate efficacy as high as 95% in preventing symptomatic COVID-19 infections. As of February 2021, 11 vaccines are authorized by at least one national regulatory authority for public use. 2 RNA vaccines, the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. 4 conventional inactivated vaccines, IBP, Corvi, Covaxin, CoronaVac, and Covivac. 4 viral vector vaccines, Sputnik V, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, COVID-SIA, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and 1 peptide vaccine, Epivax Corona. Many countries have implemented phased distribution plans that prioritize those at higher risk of complications, such as the elderly and those at high risk of exposure and transmission, such as healthcare workers. As of 6th March 2021, 300.19 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine have been administered worldwide based on official reports from national health agencies. AstraZeneca, Oxford anticipates producing 3 billion doses in 2021. Pfizer BioNTech, 1.3 billion doses, and Sputnik V, Sinopharm, Sinovac, and Johnson & Johnson 1 billion doses each. Moderna targets producing 600 million doses and COVID-C with 500 million doses in 2021. By December 2020, more than 10 billion vaccine doses had been pre-ordered by countries, with about half of the doses purchased by high-income countries comprising 14% of the world's population. Prior to COVID-19, a vaccine for an infectious disease had never been produced in less than several years. No vaccine existed for preventing a coronavirus infection in humans. However, vaccines have been produced against several animal diseases caused by coronaviruses, including, as of 2003, infectious bronchitis virus in birds, canine coronavirus, and feline coronavirus. Previous projects developed vaccines for viruses in the family Coronaviridae that affects humans have been aimed at SARS and MERS. Vaccines against SARS and MERS have been tested in non-human animals. According to studies published in 2005 and 2006, the identification and development of novel vaccines and medicines to treat SARS was a priority for governments and public health agencies around the world at that time. As of 2020, there is no cure or protective vaccine programs. Vaccine proven to be safe and effective against SARS in humans. There is also no proven vaccine against MERS. When MERS became prevalent It was believed that existing SARS research may provide a useful template for developing vaccines and therapeutics against a MERS-CoV infection. As of March 2020, there was one DNA-based MERS vaccine which completed phase 1 clinical trials in humans and three others in progress, all being viral vector vaccines. Two adenoviral vector CHAD-DX1 MERS, BBRS, JAMVAC, and one MVA vector MVA MERS. There have been several unique challenges with COVID-19 vaccine development. The urgency to create a vaccine for COVID-19 led to compressed schedules that shortened the standard vaccine development timeline. In some cases, combining clinical trial steps over months, a process typically conducted sequentially over years. Timelines for conducting clinical research, normally a sequential process requiring years of, are being compressed into safety, efficacy, and dosing trials running simultaneously over months, potentially compromising safety assurance. As an example, Chinese vaccine developers and the government Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention began their efforts in January 2020, and by March were pursuing numerous candidates on short timelines with a goal to showcase Chinese technology strengths over those of the United States and reassure the Chinese people about the quality of vaccines produced in China. Rapid development and urgency of producing a vaccine for the COVID-19 pandemic may increase the risks and failure rate of delivering a safe, effective vaccine. Additionally, research at universities obstructed by physical distancing and closing of laboratories, vaccines must progress through several phases of clinical trials to test for safety, immunogenicity, effectiveness, dose levels, and adverse effects of the candidate vaccine. Vaccine developers have to invest resources internationally to find enough participants for phase 2 and 3 clinical trials when the virus has proved to be a moving target of changing transmission rate across within countries, forcing companies to compete for trial participants. Clinical trial organizers may encounter people unwilling to be vaccinated due to vaccine hesitancy or disbelieving in the science of vaccine technology and its ability to prevent infection. Even as new vaccines are developed during the COVID-19 pandemic, licensures of COVID-19 vaccine candidates require submission of a full dossier of information on development and manufacturing quality. Internationally, the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator is a G20 and World Health Organization WHO initiative announced in April 2020. It is a cross-discipline support structure to enable partners to share resources and knowledge. It comprises 4 pillars, each managed by two to three collaborating partners. Vaccines, also called COVAX, Diagnostics, Therapeutics, and Health Systems Connector, the WHO's April 2020 R&D blueprint for the novel coronavirus, documented a large international multi-site, individually randomized controlled clinical trial to allow the concurrent evaluation of the benefits and risks of each promising candidate vaccine within 3 to 6 months of it being made available for the trial. The WHO Vaccine Coalition will prioritize which vaccines should go into phase 2 and 3 clinical trials and determine harmonized phase 3 protocols for all vaccines achieving the pivotal trial stage. After coronavirus was isolated in December 2019, its genetic sequence was published on 11th January 2020, triggering an urgent international response to prepare for an outbreak and hasten development of a preventive COVID-19 vaccine. Since early 2020, vaccine development has been expedited by an unprecedented collaboration in the multinational pharmaceutical industry and between governments. By June 2020, tens of billions of dollars were invested by corporations, governments, international health organizations, and university research groups to develop dozens of vaccine candidates and prepare for global vaccination program to immunize against COVID-19 infection. According to the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation (CEPI), the geographic distribution of COVID-19 vaccine development puts North American entities having about 40% of the activity compared to 30% in Asia and Australia, 26% in Europe, and a few projects in South America and Africa. In February 2020, the WHO said it did not expect a vaccine against SARS-CoV-2, a causative virus, to become available in less than 18 months. The rapidly growing infection rate of COVID-19 worldwide during early 2020 stimulated international alliances and government efforts to urgently organize resources to make multiple vaccines on shortened timelines. With four vaccine candidates entering human evaluation in March. On 24th June 2020, China approved the CanSino vaccine for limited use in the military and two inactivated virus vaccines for emergency use in high-risk occupations. On 11th August 2020, Russia announced the approval of its Sputnik V vaccine, Sputnik V vaccine for emergency use. So 1 month later, only small amounts of the vaccine had been distributed for use outside of the phase 3 trial. The Pfizer-BioNTech partnership submitted an EUA emergency use authorization request to the FDA, Federal Drugs Authority in US, for the mRNA vaccine BNT162b2, active ingredient tocilizumab, on 20th November 2020. On 2nd December 2020, the United Kingdom's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency (MHRA) gave temporary regulatory approval for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, becoming the first country to approve the vaccine and the first country in the Western world to approve the use of COVID-19 vaccine. As of 21st December, many countries in the European Union have authorized or approved the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates (UAE) granted emergency marketing authorization for BBIBP-4V manufactured by Sinopharm. On 11th December 2020, the US Food and Drugs Administration (FDA) granted an emergency use authorization (EUA) for the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. A week later, they granted an EUA for mRNA 1273, the Moderna vaccine. As of January 2021, 9 different technology platforms with the technology of numerous candidates remaining undefined or under research and development to create an effective vaccine against COVID-19. Most of the platforms of vaccine candidates in clinical trials are focused on the coronavirus spike protein and its variants as the primary antigen of COVID-19 infection. Platforms being developed in 2020 involve nucleic acid technologies, nucleoside modified messenger RNA and DNA, non-replicating viral vectors, peptides, recombinant proteins, live attenuated viruses, and inactivated viruses. Many vaccine technologies being developed for COVID-19 are not like vaccines already in use to prevent influenza, but rather are using next-generation strategies for precision on COVID-19 infection mechanisms. Vaccine platforms development may improve flexibility for antigen manipulation and effectiveness for targeting mechanisms of COVID-19 infection in susceptible population subgroups such as healthcare workers, the elderly, children, pregnant women, and people with existing weakened immune system. An RNA vaccine contains RNA which, when introduced into a tissue such as messenger RNA, mRNA, to cause the cells to build a foreign protein and stimulate an adaptive immune response, which teaches the body how to identify and destroy the corresponding pathogens or cancer cells. RNA vaccines often, but not always, use nucleoside modified messenger RNA. The delivery of mRNA is achieved by a co-formulation of the molecule into lipid nanoparticles, which protect the RNA strands and help the absorption into the cells. RNA vaccines were the first COVID-19 vaccines to be authorized in the US and European Union (EU). As of January 2021, authorized vaccines of this type are the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine and the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. As of February 2021, the CVN-CoV RNA vaccine from CureVac is awaiting authorization in the EU, European Union. Adenovirus vector vaccines are examples of non-replicating viral vectors using an adenovirus shell containing DNA that encodes a SARS-CoV-2 protein. The viral vector-based vaccines against COVID-19 are non-replicating, meaning that they do not make new virus particles, but rather produce only the antigen which elicits a systematic immune response. As of January 2021, authorized vaccines of this type are the British Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine. Russian Sputnik V, Chinese COVID C, and the Johnson and Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. COVID C and Johnson and Johnson's vaccines are both one-shot vaccines which offer less complicated logistics and can be stored under ordinary refrigeration for several months. Sputnik V uses Ad26 for the first dose, the same as Johnson's Johnson and Johnson's vaccines, and Ad5 for the second dose, same as COVID with similar single-dose effectiveness and full trial taking place on single-dose effectiveness. Inactivated vaccines consist of virus particles that have been grown in culture, and they are killed using a method such as heat or formaldehyde to lose disease-producing capacity, while still stimulating an immune response. As of January 2021, authorized vaccines of this type are the Chinese CoronaVac and IBP Corby, as well as the Indian Covaxin. Vaccines in clinical trials include the Valneva COVID-19 vaccine. Subunit vaccines present one or more antigens without introducing whole pathogen particles. The antigens involved are often protein subunits, but can be any molecule that is a fragment of the pathogen. As of January 2021, the only authorized vaccine of this type is a peptide vaccine, Epivac Corona. Vaccines in clinical trials include the Novavax COVID-19 vaccine and RBD dimer. The V451 vaccine was previously in clinical trials, which were terminated because it was found that the vaccine may potentially cause incorrect results for subsequent HIV testing. Additional types of vaccines that are in clinical trials include multiple DNA plasmid vaccines, at least two lentivirus vector vaccines, a conjugate vaccine, and vesicular stomatitis virus displaying the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. Scientists investigated whether existing vaccines for unrelated conditions could prime the immune system and lessen the severity of COVID-19 infection. There is experimental evidence that the BCG vaccine for tuberculosis has non-specific effects on the immune system, but no evidence that this vaccine is effective against COVID-19. Phase 1 trials test primarily for safety and preliminary dosing in a few dozen healthy subjects, while phase 2 trials following success in phase 1 evaluate immunogenicity, dose levels, efficacy based on biomarkers, and adverse effects of the candidate vaccine, typically in hundreds of people. A phase 1-2 trial consists of preliminary safety and immunogenicity testing, is typically randomized, placebo controlled, while determining more precise effective doses. Phase 3 trials typically involve more participants at multiple sites. Sites includes a control group and test effectiveness of the vaccine to prevent the disease. An interventional or pivotal trial, while monitoring for adverse effects at the optimal dose. Definition of vaccine safety, efficacy, and clinical endpoints in a phase 2-3 trial may vary between the trials of different companies, such as defining the degree of side effects, infection, or amount of transmission, and whether the vaccine prevents moderate or severe COVID-19 infection. A clinical trial design in progress may be modified as an adaptive design if accumulating data in the trial provide early insights about positive and negative efficacy of the treatment. Adaptive designs within ongoing phase 2-3 clinical trials on candidate vaccines may shorten trial durations and may use fewer subjects, possibly accelerating decisions for early termination or success, avoiding duplication of research efforts, and enhancing coordination of design changes for the Solidarity trial across its international locations. National regulatory authorities have granted emergency use authorization (EUA) for 11 vaccines. 6 of those have been approved for emergency or full use by at least one who recognized stringent regulatory authorities. RNA vaccines, Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna. Adenovirus vector vaccines, Oxford, AstraZeneca, Sputnik V, Johnson and Johnson, and COVID-C. Inactivated virus vaccines, IBP Corby, CoronaVac, Covaxin, and Covivac. Protein subunit vaccines, Epivac Corona. The effectiveness of a new vaccine is defined by its efficacy during clinical trials. The efficacy is the risk of getting the disease by vaccinated participants in the trial compared with the risk of getting the disease by unvaccinated participants. An efficacy of 0% means that the vaccine does not work at all, identical to placebo. An efficacy of 50% means that there are half as many cases of infection as in unvaccinated individuals. It is not straightforward to compare the efficacies of the different vaccines because the trials were run by with the different populations, geographics, and variants of the virus. In the case of COVID-19, a vaccine efficacy of 67% would be enough to slow the pandemic, but this assumes that the vaccine confers sterilizing immunity, which is necessary to prevent transmission. Vaccine efficacy, they say herd immunity. Okay. Vaccine efficacy reflects disease prevention, a poor indicator of transmissibility of SARS-CoV-2, since asymptomatic people can be highly infectious. The US Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and the European Medicines Agency, EMA, set a cutoff of 50% as the efficacy required to approve COVID-19 vaccine, aiming for a realistic population vaccination coverage rate of 75%, and depending on the actual basic reproduction number, the necessary effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccine is expected to be at least 70% to prevent an epidemic and at least 80% to distinguish it without further measures such as social distancing. All of us are used to these terms, social distancing. In efficacy calculations, symptomatic COVID-19 is generally defined as having both a positive PCR test and at least one or two of the defined list of COVID-19 symptoms. Although exact specifications varying between trials, the trial location also affects the reported efficacy because different countries have different prevalences of COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 variants. Efficacy of vaccines is listed: Moderna 86 to 97%, Pfizer BioNTech 90 to 97%, Sputnik V 86 to 95%, Oxford AstraZeneca 62 to 90%, Novavax 75 to 95%, IBP Corby 79% approximately, CoronaVac 78% approximately, Johnson & Johnson 49 to 82%, Covaxin 81%. The emergence of a SARS-CoV-2 variant that is moderately or fully resistant to the antibody response elicited by the current generation of COVID-19 vaccines may require modification of the vaccines. As of February 2021, the US Food and Drug Administration, FDA, believed that all FDA authorized vaccines remained effective in protecting against circulating strains of SARS-CoV-2. In December 2020, a new SARS-CoV-2 variant B.1.1.7 was identified in the UK. Early results suggest protection to the UK variant from the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Moderna has launched a trial of a new vaccine to tackle the South African 5D1.B2 variant, also known as B.1.351. On 17 February 2021, Pfizer announced neutralization activity was reduced by 2/3 for the 501.B2 variant, while stating no claims about the efficacy of the vaccine in preventing illness for this variant could yet be made. In January 2021, Johnson & Johnson, which had held trials for its AD26-CoV-2 vaccine in South Africa, reported the level of protection against moderate to severe COVID-19 infection was 72% in the US and 57% in South Africa. On 6 February 2021, the Financial Times reported that provisional trial data from the study undertaken by South Africa's University of the Witwatersrand in conjunction with Oxford University demonstrated reduced efficacy of the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine against the 501.B2 variant. The study found that the sample size of 2,000, the AZD1222 vaccine afforded only minimal protection in all but the most severe cases of COVID-19. On 7th February 2021, the Minister for Health for South Africa suspended the planned deployment of around 1 million doses of the vaccine whilst they examine the data and await advice on how to proceed. As of September 2020, 11 of the vaccine candidates in clinical development use adjuvants to enhance immunogenicity. An immunological adjuvant is a substance formulated with a vaccine to evaluate the immune response to an antigen, such as a COVID-19 vaccine or influenza virus. Specifically, an adjuvant may be used in formulating a COVID-19 vaccine candidate to boost its immunogenicity and the efficacy to reduce or prevent COVID-19 infection in vaccinated individuals. Adjuvants used in COVID-19 vaccine formulation may be particularly effective for technologies using the inactivated COVID-19 virus and recombinant protein-based or vector-based vaccines. Aluminum salts, known as alum, are the first adjuvant used for licensed vaccines and are the adjuvant for choice in some 80% of the adjuvanted vaccines. The alum adjuvant initiates diverse molecular and cellular mechanisms to enhance immunogenicity, including release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. As of 6 March 2021, 300.1 million COVID-19 vaccine doses have been administered worldwide, based on official reports from national health agencies collated by our world in data. Nations pledged to buy doses of COVID-19 vaccines before the doses are available. Though high-income nations represent only 14% of the global population as of 15th November 2020, they had contracted to buy 51% of all pre-sold doses. Some high-income nations bought more doses than would be necessary to vaccinate their entire populations. On 18 January 2021, WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus warned of problems with equitable distribution. More than 39 million doses of vaccine have now been administered in at least 49 higher income countries. Just 25 doses have been given in one lowest income country. Not 25 million, not 25,000, just 25. The Chinese Sinopharm's COVID-19 vaccine were authorized for emergency use by Bahrain and the UAE in December 2020. Some nations involved in long-standing territorial disputes have reportedly had their access to vaccines blocked by competing nations. Palestine has accused Israel blocking vaccine delivery to Gaza, while Taiwan has suggested that China has hampered its efforts to procure vaccine doses. A single dose of the COVID-19 vaccine by AstraZeneca would cost 47 Egyptian pounds, and the authorities are selling it between 100 and 200 Egyptian pounds. A report by approximately 30.5 million people and claimed about 15 million of the Egyptians would be unable to gain access to the luxury of vaccination. A human rights lawyer, Khaled Ali, launched a lawsuit against the government, forcing them to provide vaccination free of cost to all members of the public. According to the immunologist Anthony Fauci, mutant strains of virus and limited vaccine distribution pose continuing risks, and he said, "We have to get the entire world vaccinated, not just our own country." Edward Berg and Eric Gerson are calling for a global vaccination effort and wrote that the wealthier nations' me first mentality could ultimately backfire because the spread of the virus in poorer countries would lead to more variants, against which current vaccines would be less effective. Anti-vaccination activists and other people spread a variety of rumors, including overblown claims about its side effects. A story about COVID-19 being spread by childhood vaccines, misrepresentations about how the immune system works, and when and how COVID-19 vaccines are made. Some 10% of the public perceives vaccines are unsafe or unnecessary, refusing vaccination. A global health threat called vaccine hesitancy, which increases the risk of further viral spread that could lead to COVID-19 outbreaks. In mid-2020, estimates from two surveys were that 67% or 80% of the people in the US would accept a new vaccination against COVID-19, with a wide disparity by education level, employment status, race, and geography. A poll conducted by National Geographic and Morning Consult demonstrated a gender gap on willingness to take a COVID-19 vaccine in the US, with 69% of the men polled saying they would take the vaccine compared to only 51% of women. The poll also showed a positive correlation between education level and willingness to take the vaccine. In an effort to demonstrate the vaccine safety, prominent politicians have received it in camera while with others pleading to do so. Both Pfizer and Moderna are doing experimental technology that employs mRNA. There is currently no vaccine on the market that uses mRNA, so these vaccines are a world first. The AstraZeneca vaccine is based on time-tested technology that employs a harmless cold virus called adenovirus that has been genetically modified to stimulate an immune response against the coronavirus. Much to everyone's surprise, and the experimental mRNA vaccines are most effective, 95%, while the time-tested adenoviral vector vaccine shows only 62% to 90% efficacy. Pfizer's vaccine poses a logistical problem. It has to be stored at minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit, which is an obscenely cold temperature that requires specialized freezers. Moderna's vaccine can be stored in a normal freezer, while AstraZeneca's can be stored in a regular refrigerator. Once again, Pfizer's vaccine poses a unique challenge. Once it is out of the deep freeze, it's only good for 5 days. Moderna's does better 30 days, and while AstraZeneca can last 6 months. A 95% effective vaccine is better than 62 to 90% effective vaccine. But 200 million doses is better than 20 million to 50 million doses. In short, Pfizer and Moderna are producing fewer but more effective and pricier vaccine, while AstraZeneca is making a greater number of less effective and cheaper vaccines. Many countries have implemented phased distribution plans that prioritize those at higher risk of complications such as the elderly and those at high risk of exposure and transmission such as healthcare workers. In the US, the Center for Disease Control (CDC's) Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices (ACIP) voted on 1st December 2020 that the first doses of the vaccine should be prioritized for healthcare workers and residents and staff of nursing homes. ACIP recommended that the second phase of distribution include persons aged 75 years and above and non-healthcare or frontline essential workers such as those employed in grocery stores, restaurants, military, law enforcement, fire departments, retail, sanitation, schools, public transportation, self storage, warehousing, and news media. However, states control the final plans for prioritization, distribution, and logistics of vaccinating everyone as supply becomes available. The EU began phased vaccine rollout on 27th December 2020. Each member state is managing distribution with a common focus on prioritizing healthcare workers, people at high risk of exposure, the elderly, and those with the serious health conditions. The COVID-19 vaccination program in the UK prioritized elder care facility residents and carers, followed by healthcare workers and those over 80 years of age. Subsequent phases are based largely on age, declining from 75 years in 5-year increments. During 2020, as the COVID-19 pandemic escalated globally and vaccine development intensified, the WHO COVAX facility adopted the motto, "No one is safe unless everyone is safe," to emphasize the need for equitable vaccination. All lives are equal. The facility set a goal of supplying COVID-19 vaccines to nearly 100 low to middle income countries that could not afford them. COVAX sought to fundraise $6.8 billion to purchase and deliver vaccines to participating countries in proportion to their populations. On 18th December 2020, the facility announced agreements with the vaccine manufacturers to supply 1.3 billion doses for 92 low middle income countries in the first half of 2020. Yet by mid-December 2020, some 16 countries representing only 14% of the world's population had pre-ordered more than 10 billion vaccine doses, or about 51% of the available world supply. Specifically, Canada, Australia, and Japan, having only 1% of the world's COVID-19 cases, had collectively reserved some 1 billion vaccine doses, while the COVAX facility had reserved only a few hundred million doses. Concerns are raised that wealthy countries may receive their vaccines in 2021, while developing countries will be excluded from vaccinations until 2023-24. Pre-orders from rich countries were made during 2020 with 13 different vaccine manufacturers, whereas those for low to middle income countries were made primarily for the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, which is lowest in cost and has no special refrigeration needs. CEPI, WHO, and charitable vaccination organizations such as the Gates Foundation, Bill Gates Foundation, and Gavi raised over 20 billion US dollars during the first half of 2020 to fund vaccine development and preparedness for vaccinations, particularly for children in underdeveloped countries. CEPI, which was created to monitor fair distribution of infectious disease vaccines into low and middle income countries, as recommended, considering manufacturing capacity, financing and purchasing, and releasing vaccine developers from liability. Despite opposition from some vaccine manufacturers, international groups such as the Center for Artistic Activism and universities allied for essential medicines advocate for equitable access. Scientists have encouraged collaboration between the WHO, CEPI, and corporations and governments to ensure that vaccines are distributed in an evidence-based manner based on infection risk and to prioritize healthcare workers, vulnerable populations, and children. The first polio vaccine was never patented. Similar treatment of an effective COVID-19 vaccine could enable fair distribution. Governments generally prioritize certain populations such as health workers or the elderly. However, noting that the Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines will expire within hours after being removed from the freezer, some have argued that if the originally intended person is not available for the scheduled vaccination, it is better to apply those doses to anyone who can be found rather than discard them. Favored distribution of vaccines within one or a few select countries called vaccine sovereignty is a criticism of some of the vaccine development partnerships, such as for the AstraZeneca University of Oxford vaccine candidate, concerning whether there may be prioritized distribution first within the UK and to the highest bidder, the US, which made an advance payment of 1.2 billion US dollars to secure 300 million vaccine doses for Americans, even before the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine or a Sanofi vaccine was proved safe or effective. Concerns exist whether some countries producing vaccines may impose protectionist controls by export restrictions that would stockpile a COVID-19 vaccine for their own population. The Chinese government pledged in May that a successful Chinese vaccine could become a global public good, implying enough doses would be manufactured for both national and global distribution. Unlike mRNA vaccines, which have to be stored at sub-zero temperatures, inactivated vaccines from Sinovac, and Sinopharm require ordinary refrigeration and may have more appeal in developing countries. In June, the Serum Institute of India (SII), a major manufacturer of global vaccines, reached a licensing agreement with AstraZeneca to make 1 billion doses of vaccine for low and middle income countries, of which half of the doses would go to India, called Covid-Shield. Similar preferential in India. Similar preferential Bharat Biotech is Covaxin in India. Similar preferential homeland distribution may exist if a vaccine is manufactured in Australia. In the US, the vaccine distribution line, while varying by state, has placed healthcare workers and senior citizens high on the list of COVID-19 vaccination, while less essential workers are secondary recipients. Due to the long process of distribution, some individuals try to secure a more favorable position on the vaccination list, such as by the bribery or making donations to hospitals. In response, state governments impose large fines and other penalties for violation of federal vaccine distribution guidelines in use. Because of strict guidelines, the COVID-19 vaccine black market, very small, black market for everything, enabled some individuals to buy illegal early access to a vaccine. By mid-February 2021, China had arrested 80 people involved in vaccine contraband, and the Colombian government intercepted a freezer with 70 doses of a Chinese manufactured vaccine that a traveler brought into the airport without any accompanying paperwork. An effective vaccine for COVID-19 could save trillions of dollars in global economic impact, according to American business magnate Bill Gates, and would therefore make any price tag in the billions look small in comparison. In early stages of the pandemic, it was not known if it if it would be possible to create a safe, reliable, and affordable vaccine for this virus, and it was not known exactly how much the vaccine development would cost. There was a possibility that billions of dollars could be invested without success, or an effective vaccine. Once an effective vaccine would be developed, billions of doses would need to be manufactured and distributed worldwide. In phase 1 clinical trials, 84 to 90% of the vaccine candidates failed to make it to a final approval during development, and from phase 3, 25.7% failed. The investment by a manufacturer in a vaccine candidate may exceed $1 billion US and end with millions of useless doses given ad- advanced manufacturing agreements. As of November 2020, companies subsidized under the US Operation Warp Speed program have set initial pricing of 19.5 to 25 US dollars per dose, in line with the influenza vaccine. Supply chain and logistics planning is very crucial for the success of vaccination program on such a massive scale. Manufacturing such large volume of vaccines in a short period of time poses another challenge. Besides training healthcare staff for vaccination and setting up a large number of vaccination centers is also another challenging task. We fervently wish that we'll swim against all these odds and immunize all the vulnerable people in our world with high efficacy by God's grace. It is the middle of March 2020 and vaccinations are going on in full swing even in developing and underdeveloped countries. Adverse effects are there, including some people losing their precious lives, but not significant. Overall, we have made good progress so far, but mutation is a big worry, especially the South African variant. 100% efficacy is a practical impossibility. Let us keep our fingers crossed. Debates, discussion on open-ended topics like this can go on forever. Anyhow, let me pull the plug here. We'll meet again real soon with another interesting topic. Some of the statements views expressed are solely mine based on limited knowledge gained over 6 decades of versatile experience. Always watch these videos with a closed caption, subtitles for absolute 100% comprehension as per my sincere recommendation zillion times so far. I know I rushed through to complete the presentation within 20 minutes maximum. This time limit is self-imposed to retain the viewer's attention as of now. I am quite aware of the fact that I exceed this time limit. Sometimes I take double or even triple this time depending on the topic, since I make honest attempts to cover a selected topic more elaborately, including so many intricate fine details referring a wide variety of sources, in particular Wikipedia quite extensively, besides articles and books published recently. Besides, of course, I have sprinkled my own salt and pepper and season it with my personal experiences so far in my life and also intuition. Stay at home as much as possible to maintain social distancing attributed to pandemic novel COVID-19 and prolong your lifespan. Lead a healthy life. God, also known as the Supreme Power, is the one and only one who can put a stop to natural and unnatural, maybe viral and cyber war events like pandemics and epidemics, which ultimately paves the way for apocalypse and extinction of all sentient species on earth for no fault of others. Rest in peace and harmony. Today, I have taken 43 minutes. Good, not bad.